J-horror is a fascinating genre for me. It's odd, otherworldly at times, usually directed in a weird way, and has extremely dense atmospheres. I want to talk about one specific film, but I also want to talk about the state and history of J-horror to give some insight into this genre and style. The film I'll be focusing on is the original Ringu film. I'll be relating to the novel it's based on and the American adaptation as well. My history with the film begins with the 2002 American remake of the film. It was one of the first films I saw in my life as I was just a few months old. The only reason I know this is because my parents told me about it. Of course, I wouldn't remember watching a film at like 5 months old, but my first real memory of Ringu or Ring was when I was 9 or 10 years old. The American remake was playing on cable and it scared the shit out of me. No other way to say it. Around that time, I was horrible with horror, very squeamish, and it would mess with my sleep a lot. But just a few years later, I found a massive appreciation for horror. I enjoyed getting scared. Don't know what happened during that time, but I'm glad it turned out this way. That's when I watched the original Ringu, and yeah, I dug it. I really dug it. Pretty low budget looking, at times overacted, some corny jump scares and generic music at times, but when it really wants to hit you, it does. The lack of music is what really gets me invested. Music is usually a signal for comfort when it comes to any kind of horror film for me, because most of the time it takes me out of it. It feels like suddenly there's a wall between me and the film, and that's really bad when you're trying to scare the shit out of me. To me at least, there's one perfect way to scare me, and I'm sure many others. Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Cure are all prime examples of films that scare the shit out of me. Although these films can technically be classified as thrillers, they are much scarier than most horror due to their emphasis on atmosphere and the dragging out of scenes, aka slow burns. And Hideo Nakada's Ringu tries this and succeeds for the most part. It slips up at times, as I mentioned, with the corny jump scares and generic music choices at times, but other than that, it can be a pretty intense 90-minute watch. Before we discuss the film, I want to first discuss some of the history of the film and talk about J-horror as a genre. Ringu is the 1998 adaptation of Koji Suzuki's novel titled Ring or Ringu. There are many novels and many, probably too many, films. I've personally only read the first novel and found it to be interesting, as it was more of a science fiction thriller mystery than a supernatural horror mystery. There are differences between the novel and the film. The main difference is that Sadako doesn't play that big of a role in the novel. They're there, sure, but the focus is the videotape itself and the virus one gets from watching it. Yes, that's right, in the films it's Sadako popping out of a TV after 7 days, but in the novel, you succumb to a mysterious virus similar to the smallpox, ending with a heart attack and death. This makes the novel sound a little more grounded in reality, but the same dread and race to get rid of the curse are still there. I really like the idea that all these hallucinations the characters go through after viewing the tape can all be attested to a strange virus, rather than a 4-foot tall little girl with powers haunting you. But that just wouldn't be that scary visually, so I get the need to change from a virus to an unnaturally moving and lifeless looking girl. It's just much more striking. Another major difference is this guy, Ryuji. In the film, he can be seen as a respectable character that wants to save his ex-wife and son's lives. In the novel, however, he's a major league asshole and a criminal. He's got a very dark sense of humor and claims to have raped a bunch of girls. So yeah, not the best guy. Oh yeah, the main character is also different. In the film, we have a single wife raising her son. She works as a TV reporter. But in the novel, we have a married man with a wife and an infant daughter. He works as a newspaper reporter. There are many more differences, but these are the most notable ones, I feel. Okay, so J-horror is pretty much dead. I personally think that sucks because I really enjoyed the sometimes cheesy and weird nature of them. There were very few good J-horror titles, but I still enjoyed even the bad ones. They're just extremely fun to watch, especially with others. The genre is fairly new, only emerging in the late 80s. Its main purpose was to create eerie and dark atmospheres. And as a dude whose favorite aspect of films is an emphasis on atmosphere and cinematography, it was very much pandering towards me. The earliest J-horror film I could find is Dai Kanyama Wonderland Horror, a 45-minute film from 1987 directed by Teruyoshi Ishii. It's pretty fucking weird. I only skimmed through the film to see what it holds since I couldn't find it with subs, but yeah, weird ass film. It's still up on YouTube in full if you do want to watch it though. The final shot of the film is pretty hilarious, I ain't gonna lie. The real interesting early J-horror film for me is Psychic Vision Jaganre, directed by the same person as the previously discussed film. I've been infatuated with this film since I saw it back in 2017, 2018, so much so that I integrated one of the posters into one of my album covers. But honestly, I have no idea why this film has been on my mind for 5 years. I didn't even watch it subtitled, so I had no idea what was going on. But something about it just stood out to me. The way it's shot, the color grading, the acting, and the flow of the film, it all kind of captured me. The general gist of the story is that there's a pop song that was composed many years ago that is now only being sung on, and is actually cursed. It was composed by a person who is now a vengeful spirit. I only recently found out that the screenwriter for the film is Chiaki J. Konaka, which may be the reason why I've been so infatuated with it. For those who don't know, Chiaki J. Konaka is the writer of Serial Experiments Lain, which is my favorite anime, and he also wrote a chunk of Technolize, which is like my fourth favorite anime. Both shows I've been thinking about since I viewed them. Chiaki just kinda has a pen like that where he grabs me and forces complex and new thoughts into my head. But yeah, Psychic Vision Jagane is a very interesting watch. I recommend it if you're into weird cinema shit like me. Other than that though, I haven't watched too many early J-horror films. There are many I'm interested in, but most of the stuff I've watched comes from like post-95 era. Films like Kokori, which is basically just Ouija board shit, 444, 444, 4444. I'm pretty sure that's enough fours. And In a Corner, which are Takashi Shimizu's directorial debuts and preludes to the Ju-On series, and a lot more. Gotta say though, my favorite thing about early J-horror are the posters or VHS covers. I fucking love them to death. They have this style to them that you wouldn't expect horror films to have, but it works so well. My favorites from J-horror include Ringu, of course, Psychic Vision Jagane, Noroi, Pulse, and the early Ju-On films. J-horror became very popular in the 2000s to the point where America wanted some of that dough, so they went and made an absurd number of remakes. Almost all of them being horrible, and then people got sick of J-horror. So it slowed down, and in the early 2010s, we barely see it anymore. Some people can't seem to let go of that time though. That includes myself. Takashi Shimizu still makes J-horror films to this day, and I don't think anyone else does it consistently like him. I honestly commend him for trying to keep it alive. I haven't watched any of his latest works, so I can't comment on them, but yeah, pretty bummed out about what's happened to J-horror. It's even affected video games as well. I fucking love Siren and the Fatal Frame franchise, and really want to play the Twilight Syndrome games, if they ever get translated. There is a bit of a resurgence in J-horror when it comes to games, thankfully. Fatal Frame 5 recently got ported to all modern platforms, and Fatal Frame 4 is getting its first ever official localization and is being ported to modern platforms as well. The Deathmark series has been fun despite its flaws, and the people over at Chilia's are making short and sweet J-horror games that take on PS1 styled visuals. If you couldn't tell by now, I really do love this genre. It may not have my favorite films ever or my favorite games ever, but it's an important part of who I am and what I enjoy in media. But enough of that, let's actually talk about Ringu and its American counterpart. Ringu is an exception to many J-horror films because it actually has a decent American adaptation. The atmosphere isn't too far off the Japanese original, and the story is very similar. The issue comes from how it was directed. I feel that the original builds Dread better than the American film. I feel the Hans Zimmer score was too much in the American film. I feel that Sadako, or rather in this film Samara, looks like shit. The makeup is way too much, to the point where it doesn't have that alien yet human look of the original film. She just looks grotesque and inhuman. The Japanese film is also much better paced and shot. Every time they tell us which day it is, I get chills. Like, how's this gonna end? What's gonna happen on day 7? Also, the presentation of the tape in the OG Ringu is much more unsettling to me. It's so odd and actually feels like something you can stumble across randomly in an aftermarket. The American remakes feels too high budget and tries too hard to be unnerving. It just feels out of place when this is supposed to be something that looks low budget but also alien at the same time. The OGs just fits the VHS style perfectly, but other than those issues, I'd still say the American version is worth watching. The blue tint on the film really helps with the atmosphere of the film, and the actor performances are pretty good. As for the best parts of Ringu, well, there's obviously the moment Sadako comes out of the TV, absolutely horrifying stuff. The whole movie was building up to this moment. No music at first, just the repeating sound of swings, and when the music comes in, it works perfectly. No fast cuts, Sadako's movements are unnatural, both slow and fast at the same time, and that shot of her looking down at Ryuji and the viewer is fucking perfect. Both the videotape itself and the scenes surrounding it are amazing, well shot and lit, and the tape is some pretty experimental movie making, which I appreciate. I also really like the scene where Ryuji is sitting down on a bench. Very simple, but also very effective in adding some depth to his character and making the atmosphere even denser. There's also the scene where Ryuji confronts Takashi near the sea, and it's just really well shot. There's important plot stuff and all during this scene, but I just really like the shots here. As for how it holds up, for the most part it holds up well. Sure, most of us don't use VHS tapes anymore, mainly just enthusiasts, but it's still pretty scary stuff. Some cheap effects are spread here and there, like when Reiko first sees the videotape on the shelf, but other than those, it holds up better than horror films that even just came out last year. I'd say maybe Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Pulse and its fear of technology has aged better and is more effective, but Ringu just hits a spot that Pulse doesn't for me. As for the current state of the franchise, it's somehow still going. There are a lot of films here, like a lot, more than there should be. There are 14 films currently, the most recent of which came out this very year. It's kinda odd what's happened to the franchise and how it's kinda just become silly now. Like, we got a film called Sadako vs Kayako, and the promo for the film was Sadako and Kayako playing baseball together. And then there was also Rings, which came out in 2017. Biggest fucking snorefest ever. That and the newest American Grudge film. I remember going to see Rings after a school day and I just left before I finished it. It was just that bad. It also has probably one of the dumbest opening sequences in a film I've seen. I think the coolest thing we've gotten out of this franchise in recent times is Sadako coming to Dead by Daylight. Other than that, not much else has come out of it, and the issue is that this story has been told to death. And it might be because of this that J-horror lost steam. Instead of trying to come up with new stories or ideas, people were just telling the same story over and over. Of course people would get sick of it. I feel like J-horror might still be a staple today if more original films were made and seen by Westerners. But who knows, we got classics like Noroi, but it didn't gain much traction in the West. All I know is that this genre is fun as fuck and you should try a few out if you haven't already.